Hello, everyone. In this monologue, I'm going to talk about the Israeli-Gaza/Hamas conflict. We're going to do it in a question and answer format. So, without further ado, first question: why did Hamas attack Israel on October the 7th? And is there any legitimacy to that attack? Answer: that the reason they attacked, it's not over sovereignty. Okay, they already had sovereignty in Gaza. The reason they attacked is because of a jihadist ideology that Zionism itself is evil and it should be uprooted and it should be fought, and that the Jews do not have the right to have any homeland, any self-rule in the land of Israel/Palestine. In other words, what they're trying to do is eliminate the state of Israel. Not sure exactly whether they want to kill Jews in the process as well, but at the very minimum, they want to annihilate the state of Israel and eject or forcibly convert or something along those lines all the Jews that are there. So this is jihadism. This is important to note this because this is not a reasonable position. Nobody, no even remotely, even moderately moderate individual, whether on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side of the conflict, would propose such a thing in 2023. And so this ideology is motivated by a strong belief in what they believe is Islam. I don't know if Islam actually says that. It probably doesn't. But at least that's what Hamas and these fighters believe. And everything that they do is actually demonstrative and evident of this ideology. They say it openly, and they also act it out as well. You note that, for example, that when they kill Israelis, they say, Allah Akbar, God is great. So they're convincing themselves that they're doing God's will by killing people. And so this is why this is such a pernicious ideology, and this is what motivates what's happening here. The reason I'm saying this is because in the West, this is completely ignored. There's a lot of people who think that the conflict is about free Palestine, especially in response to October 7th, to the October 7 attack. Not especially. I mean, they've been doing it all along. But when I say especially, I mean it's especially jarring that they're doing it after this attack because it's just so obvious. This is not about freeing Palestine. Israel left a long time ago. They left Gaza. They gave them self-rule, and it is only there, and it is only imposing restrictions in as much as Hamas has become the rulers, and they have chosen. This is a choice that they make. They made a voluntary choice. They didn't have to do it, but they chose to continue the resistance to the state of Israel from Gaza by throwing rockets. They've continued throwing rockets intermittently over the past, more than 15 years. And so only in as much as they do that do they have restrictions on movement and restrictions on importing goods and material, because they are repurposing it for military purposes to fight an offensive fight, not a defensive fight, an offensive fight against the state of Israel. Okay, so again, to summarize, the motive of Hamas' attack was jihadist. It was religious fanaticism, believing that that's what the Quran and Islam commands them to do, and there's no legitimacy, obviously, to such a claim. It's ridiculous, and this is where religion rears its ugly head. You know, there's a lot of elements of religion that are nice. I'll talk about all religions here, including Islam, but this part of the religion, believing that the Quran commands you to annihilate the state of Israel and to kill Jews, is pretty bad. Okay, and this is why the West should never, ever support Hamas. Your ideology and theirs do not align. Again, this is not about freeing Palestine. This is about killing a member of the opposite religion and preventing them from having self-rule because they are of a different religion. Question number 2. Is it true that the Israeli occupation is legal under international law? This question comes up because a lot of people say, oh, that's why they're still fighting. They're fighting the Israeli occupation. Okay, so first of all, before we answer this question, what does it even mean, the term Israeli occupation? So the term normally refers to a military occupation. It's important to distinguish this. There's two types of occupation. I'm occupying my land right now, right? So this is a civil occupation. I just literally live here, right? Now, if somebody were to come in and because they believe that I'm a threat to them and they just come onto my land. Either they embed some type of soldier within my house, or they're just stationed in front of my house for military purposes, okay, in order to neutralize me as a military threat to them. That would be called a military occupation. So these two are not the same. Now, when Israel came into possession of the West Bank and Gaza, there's obviously a military occupation, right? I'm talking about historically, and they gave back some areas, etc. We're not going to talk about that. I'm talking about after 1967, all of the area was occupied, at a minimum, it was occupied militarily. Now, in certain areas, the Arabs were asked to leave, including, for example, the plaza in front of the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Okay, so they were like ejected from that area, and the Israelis cleared the land, and they erected a huge plaza where Jews can come and pray, etc. So this is not here we come into a civilian occupation, right? They didn't clear the land necessarily for military purposes. They cleared it because they wanted Jews to be able to come there and use it, right? So this is an example of civilian. So the first thing to note here is that when the international law addresses the concept of occupation, it's talking about if the objective of the fight is militarily, then what these conventions are saying is, do not transfer your civilians onto this land, because that's not the purpose of this fight. The purpose of this fight is to fight the enemy militarily and to defeat them militarily. Okay, whatever that entails, whatever the military objective is. But the purpose isn't to, permanently transfer the land to yourself. Therefore, do not, in the process of that fighting, do not transfer your own civilians onto that land. That's what the convention says, which is restating the obvious, really, right? This is a military conflict, therefore do not involve civilians in this. However, if the land is disputed to begin with, if the side that comes into military occupation of the land also lays a legitimate, I shouldn't use the word legitimate, but if they genuinely, in good faith, believe that land belongs to them, then it's kind of ridiculous for the International Convention to say, oh, you're not allowed to move civilians. Well, why not? That's why I'm fighting, because I believe the land is mine. Okay? A good example in Europe of this would be Alsace-Lorraine, which is a land that was, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but this is a land that was disputed between France and Germany for many, many years. Clearly, if France and Germany had a fight, it's not going to happen nowadays, but during the decades when this was like an active contest over this land, so if either nation comes into possession of the land, of course they're allowed to, rule the land and transfer their own civilians onto the land. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily taking away possession from individuals from the opposing nation. Like if an individual owns a land, ejecting them, that's a whole other matter. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about land that is not necessarily being used, or is either owned by the public or whatever, and then you have civilians from one side who are coming and settling there and living there, which is what Israel did, right? So in a case like that, of course, in my opinion, this is not addressed by any international conventions. International conventions are addressing situations where the fight is militarily only. There is no good faith claim on the land. I'm talking about a permanent civilian claim on the land. In the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both sides are laying claim over the land, and both claims are plausible at first blush. Okay, the Israelis are saying, the Palestinians are saying, hey, we lived here for so many centuries, and these Zionist people are coming in here starting in the mid-19th century. They're trying to make a homeland. No, we're not doing this. This is our land. The whole thing belongs to us. The Israelis are saying, hey, this is the land of Israel. We used to live here a long time ago, and so we're coming back. We suffered the horrors of the Holocaust. We're stateless. We want a state. We want it here. This is our historical connection. We're coming back here. So both of them have a reasonable claim. Talk about reasonable to begin with. Some of these claims are no longer reasonable in 2023. Okay, but I'll talk about in the early 20th century, even up until 1948, both sides made sense to some extent. Now, in my opinion, the Palestinian side, fast forwarding, the Palestinian side maybe made more sense, beginning of the 20th century. By the time 1948 comes around, it no longer makes sense because it's already a radical claim at that point because the Israeli/Zionist settlements are pretty robust at that point. Where are they going? They're not going to submit to I'm talking here to the Palestinians, they're not going to submit to your rule. It doesn't make any sense for you to rule over them. And so I think the more reasonable sense at that point would have been, the more reasonable position at that point would have been to give Israel at least some modicum of sovereignty. But what I'm trying to say here is, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the land is in fact disputed, and the original dispute theoretically is reasonable on both sides. Therefore, when Israel comes into possession of such land that it disputes, that it legitimately in good faith has a claim on, okay, the international conventions do not address that. Israel does have a right in a situation like this to transfer its civilians to this land because it in fact believes that it's part of the land of Israel. It's part of their sovereignty. Okay, so again, this makes no sense to say that it applies here. It doesn't. It doesn't apply here. So that's the first thing that I want to clear out of the way. So an Israeli occupation, okay, which is a military occupation, is obviously legal, but in addition, it's also allowed to transfer civilians into land that it conquered, so long as it has a good faith claim on that land. Okay, last question. Is it true that Israel routinely kills civilians in Gaza and engages in collective punishment, yes, against international law? So let's break this down in, these are two questions, but let's start with the first one. So the first one, does it routinely kill civilians? Well, technically, yes, but, and this is a very, very big but, this is not what these original international conventions were meant to address. So the original conventions were written a long time ago. And back then, there was no terrorism, for example. Back then, if you lost the war, you lost. That's it. You put up with the consequences of losing. You fight and you lose, then you surrender, and that's it. Then it's over. There was no guerrilla fighting. There was none of that, and there was no cynicism either. There was no side preying on the sympathies of the international community and on other countries, etc., in order to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. Okay, so in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that things are being distorted and being exploited in order to create situations that were not envisioned and were not addressed by these original international conventions. So what I'm getting at here is that the international conventions are meant to address when an enemy targets civilians. So the enemy is trying to achieve a military objective, and to do that, it figures, I'm going to kill the soldiers, but I'm also going to kill civilians. Why not? Why not? They're subject to the enemy rule, right? So I might as well kill them. I'm going to kill the non-fighters as well. So the international law says, no, you're not allowed to do that. So these people, they're innocent. They're not even fighting you. They're not even achieving anything by doing that. You're just killing people for no reason because they're not fighters. You can still win the battle without killing them. So what's the point? That's the reason. That's the main reason why it's illegal under international law. Okay, it's a sense of just being compassionate and human when you're conducting war. Okay, just target your military objective without killing civilians unnecessarily. It doesn't accomplish anything for you because these are non-fighters. Okay, that's the reason. In the case of Palestinians and Gaza in particular, what they're doing is they are on purpose embedding civilians within their military installations so that when they know that Israel is going to strike back in a defensive manner, so they know the civilians are going to die, and then they're going to be able to arouse international sympathy for their cause. So it just doesn't apply. So what I'm saying here is that there's a distinction between targeting civilians and killing civilians collaterally. And in the Gaza case, it's even better than killing them collaterally, because the Gazans are purposefully embedding them. Collateral killing means that, hey, I'm killing my military target and there happens to be a civilian around. Now, sure, if you are able to reasonably, it's not too difficult for you to isolate the military and civilian, then yes, the international law would apply. Don't kill a civilian if you're able to kill the military objective or to achieve your military objective without killing civilians. But again, collateral damage is not the same. Collateral killing is not the same as purposeful killing. And in the Gaza case, again, it's even better for the Israeli side because they are purposefully doing that. So that's not what is being addressed by civilian killing. Secondly, collective punishment. Again, in the same vein, collective punishment applies when it is easily separable, the military and the civilian. So, for example, if you have a military, the military of your enemy, the military forces of your enemy, they're living on a fort, and you're able to isolate that fort, to besiege that fort. Only military lives on that fort. The civilians are dispersed throughout the town, but the military forces of your enemy are in a fort, and you're able to just besiege the fort only. You're not besieging the whole city. So you're just preventing food and water and fuel and whatever from reaching only the enemies within that fort. So what military law says, don't do collective punishment. Don't hurt the entire nation that you are fighting against. Only hurt the people who are actually fighting, right? But in this case, it's not going to work. Because if Israel allows, and again, this has been proven, this is not just a suspicion, it's not just a fear. We know that if we give Gaza resources, the first place it goes to is military. They're the priority, right? So if you give them water, so the fighters are going to get water. If you give them food, the fighters get food. If you give them anything that's metal, it goes towards a weapon. The fighters are going to build a weapon and they're going to shoot on Israel. Okay, they've repurposed pipe that was meant to be used for drinking water, for transporting water. They've repurposed those for bombs. This is how bad it is in Gaza. So in a case like this, again, you could make some case that Israel should use some type of discretion because civilians will suffer. Okay, whatever. But this is not what is being addressed in international conventions. International conventions, collective punishment, when it's easy to separate, when it's easy to decollectivize it, when it's relatively easy to say, hey, I'm going to be targeting the military forces only and not the civilians. In this case, you can't. So the only way for Israel to defensively fight back and defeat Hamas, who is attacking them, again, this is a defensive war, not offensive. Okay, and again, we addressed this in the first question. These are jihadists who are trying to eliminate this entire state of Israel and kill all the Jews. So the only way for Israel to effectively prosecute this war is to engage in collective punishment, because the military forces are just mingling among the civilians. There's just no way to separate the two. And they're repurposing anything that you give them for civil purposes, they're going to go ahead and use it for military purposes. So this is not, again, it's just that there's no way to do it otherwise. So to say that Israel is not allowed to do in collective punishment is effectively saying it's not allowed to defend itself. That's what it is. Think about it. Check yourself, as they say. Check yourself. Is that really what the people who wrote these international conventions, is that what they meant? I'm not allowed to defend myself? Because the only way that I can defend myself is by engaging in collective punishment. I have no other way to do it. Okay? So these are the 3 questions that I wanted to address here. Thank you for watching and have a good day.